What would you do if the world laughed at your inheritance? If the only thing left to your name was an old house hidden deep in a silent forest, wrapped in vines and whispers of the past? Some said it was worthless. Others said it was cursed. But what they didn't know was that beneath those worn floorboards lay a secret no one was meant to find, a forgotten door, a buried treasure, a truth powerful enough to change everything. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below and subscribe. The summer afternoon lay quiet and warm over the Vermont woods. The sun poured down in long golden beams through thick green leaves. The dirt road was dry, lined with wild ferns and oak trees that reached high into the sky. The air carried the faint scent of pine and river water. There was no sound of engines or distant towns, only the hum of insects and the soft rustling of leaves moving gently in the breeze. Michael Carter drove slowly along that narrow road in his black pickup truck, its engine humming low, as if not wanting to disturb the quiet. He was 45 years old, broad-shouldered, lean, and carrying the weight of a man who had lived more years than the number shown on his birth certificate. His hair was hazel brown with silver strands near the temples, kept short out of habit. A rough shadow of a beard framed a jawline that had once been square and sharp, now softened by years of wind, dust, and sand. His eyes were gray-blue, steady but distant, like a man who had learned not to expect peace, but still search for it anyway. He wore a plain shirt under a brown jacket faded from the sun, old jeans, and worn boots that had once walked across places he would rather not remember. Next to him, on the passenger seat, sat Buddy. The dog was a 6-year-old German Shepherd, with a black and tan coat that gleamed softly under the sunlight slipping through the windshield. His ears stood tall, turning at every sound beyond the truck. His build was lean and strong, his chest broad, and his movements steady and alert. His amber eyes reflected quiet intelligence. Buddy was not just a dog. He was a soldier's shadow, trained to watch, listen, and act without fear. He had been with Michael through the hardest parts of his life, and in some silent way, they carried each other's weight. The letter on the dashboard was already wrinkled at the edges from being handled too many times. It carried the name of a lawyer in town and the words that had led him down this road. Michael had inherited a house, Willow Creek House, a place buried somewhere in the trees, left to him by a distant relative he barely remembered. When the lawyer had called, her voice had sounded formal, but not cold. Her name was Sarah Whitmore. She was in her early 50s, a tall woman with narrow shoulders, sharp cheekbones, and chestnut hair streaked with gray that she tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her skin was pale, her hands elegant, but lined with years of work. She wore dark suits that fit precisely, giving the impression of a woman who did not like things out of place. Her tone during the call had been efficient but respectful, as if she had learned long ago that the best way to deal with grief was to not wrap it in unnecessary softness. Sarah had been a lawyer for decades, known in town for being calm, direct, and utterly unshakable. Michael had not planned to drive out here. Not really. But something about the quiet tone of her voice, the way she had said the name, Willow Creek House, had settled into the back of his mind and stayed there like an echo. The truck rolled to a stop as the trees parted, and there it was. Willow Creek House stood at the end of the road, like a ghost from another century. 2 stories tall, built from dark wood and stone. Its roof was layered with clay tiles veined with green moss. Ivy climbed up its walls like thin green fingers. The porch sagged slightly, but the frame still held. Tall windows stared blankly back, their glass fogged and streaked. The gate at the front, made of old black iron, hung slightly open. A gravel path led up to the house, overgrown with weeds and scattered wildflowers. Michael shut off the engine, and silence filled the air again. He could hear the cicadas now, a summer chorus that pulsed through the forest like a heartbeat. Buddy sat up straighter, ears pricked, tail low, but steady. Michael watched the house. His chest felt tight, the kind of pressure he used to feel when stepping out of an armored vehicle in a place where the ground might be hiding danger. He hated that feeling. It had followed him home years ago and never truly left. He stepped out of the truck, boots crunching against the gravel. The warm air wrapped around him, heavy, but not suffocating. Buddy leapt down beside him, landing without a sound, his nose immediately lowering to the ground. The dog began to move slowly, sniffing the air, tracing scents invisible to Michael. His tail was straight, the way it always was when he sensed something he could not name. The house smelled of damp stone and old wood, of a place that had been sealed too long. Michael pushed open the iron gate. It gave a tired groan. Buddy padded ahead, silent and sure. Michael followed the path, passing through patches of light and shade. The porch steps complained under his boots. He pulled the key from his pocket. It was brass, heavier than he had expected, with tiny carved lines curling across its surface. Sarah had mailed it with a short note, and the deed folded neatly inside the envelope. No explanations. Just a key and a signature. Michael pushed it into the lock and turned. It moved smoothly, as if the house had been waiting. Inside, the air was cooler, shaded from the sun. Dust floated in the long yellow beams that cut through the narrow windows. The silence inside was heavier than the quiet outside, the kind that settles in places abandoned long enough for the world to forget them. The hallway was wide, the floorboards warped and creaking with every step. An old staircase rose at the far end, its banister wrapped in cobwebs. On either side, open doorways led into large rooms stripped bare of anything except faded wallpaper and forgotten furniture under dusty sheets. Buddy entered first, his claws tapping softly on the wood. He moved like a shadow, ears twitching. Then he froze. Michael saw the change in the dog immediately. Shoulders squared, head low, a rumble deep in his chest. Michael followed his gaze toward the far end of the parlor. A narrow door stood slightly open. According to Sarah's papers, that door led to the basement. A faint, cool draft slid out from the darkness beyond. It smelled of moss, stone, and time. His pulse quickened. The basement should have been nothing, a room full of dust and broken tools. But standing here, in the doorway of this old house, it did not feel like nothing. It felt like something holding its breath. Buddy let out a quiet growl, low and steady. It was the same sound he had made years ago when their unit had approached an unmarked building in the heat of war. It was not a bark. It was a warning. Michael clenched his jaw. He did not like how easily his body responded to that sound. His shoulders tightened, and his mind went sharp the way it always did when he was preparing to act. He hated how familiar it was. He crouched beside Buddy and placed a hand on the dog's shoulder. The fur was warm and soft under his palm. The steadiness of Buddy's breathing grounded him, pulled him out of the noise in his head. He whispered, calm and low, not because Buddy needed it, but because he did. Then he stood again, eyes locked on that dark stairwell. The house creaked overhead, as if something had shifted. He took a step closer, but stopped. The instinct was still there, the soldier's instinct. He scanned the shadows, the corners, the edges where light ended and darkness began. Nothing moved, but the silence below was not empty. It was waiting. He stepped back and closed the basement door slowly. His heart was still beating too fast, but his face was calm. There would be time to check tomorrow. Tonight, he would keep the windows open and let the summer air move through this still house. As he turned back toward the porch, Buddy stayed near his leg, glancing once more toward the closed door. Outside, the sun was dipping lower, brushing everything with a warm orange glow. The forest hummed with life. Inside, Willow Creek House remained quiet, holding on to whatever stories it had buried in its walls. The heat of midsummer lay over the Vermont forest like a quiet blanket. The air was thick and still, with only the faint song of crickets rising through the woods. The sun filtered through green canopies, painting the dirt road with patches of light and shadow. A thin layer of dust clung to everything, and the old house at the end of the path looked less like a home and more like a memory made of wood and stone. Michael Carter stood at the porch of Willow Creek House with a broom in one hand and sweat collecting at his temple. He wore his brown jacket open, a faded shirt underneath, jeans dusty from the road, and boots that had already taken on the scent of old wood. His hazel hair was damp from the heat, and the silver strands near his temples caught the light. Buddy lay near the steps, stretched out but alert, his tan and black fur gleaming under the sun. His amber eyes followed every sound from the woods with quiet attention. Michael had started cleaning early in the morning, thinking it would take only a few hours. Now, as the sun climbed higher, the house still felt as if it was breathing out years of neglect. Dust rose in soft clouds each time he swept the floor. The walls, made of dark wood, creaked when touched. The heat made the old timbers groan like something alive. The smell of moss and damp stone from the basement still lingered in the air. The memory of the night before had stayed with him. Buddy had growled at the basement, and though nothing had happened, the feeling had followed Michael into his sleep. His mind had drifted back to nights overseas. The sound of sand shifting under boots, the weight of the rifle in his hands, the silence before something went wrong. The nightmares were familiar companions, creeping through the edges of his sleep, but Buddy had pressed against him, warm and solid. That small weight at his side had pulled him out of the fog before panic took hold. Michael took a breath and went back to work. The living room had once been grand. A wide fireplace took up an entire wall, now blackened with soot. Two high windows framed the view of the forest outside. Ivy had crept inside through a cracked window frame, its roots clinging stubbornly to the wood. He swept and wiped, moving slow, his movements carrying a quiet rhythm born from years of habit. Clean, repair, check the corners. The kind of methodical routine soldiers never forget. By midday, he stepped out to the porch for air. The summer sun beat down harder, turning the gravel path into a shimmering line of heat. He wiped his brow and glanced at the dirt road that led to the house. Something caught his eye. Tracks. Deep, fresh tire marks curved slightly near the gate. They were not from his truck. He crouched down, boots pressing into the warm earth. The edges of the tire prints were still sharp, the soil not yet settled. A large vehicle had been here recently, likely a heavy SUV. Michael traced the line of the tracks with his eyes until they disappeared into the trees. Whoever it was had stopped near the gate, turned around, and left. Buddy came closer, nose to the ground, his ears tilted forward, tail still. He sniffed slowly, then lifted his head toward the woods, his body stiff. The dog's instincts were sharp, honed over years of working alongside Michael. He gave a quiet, low huff, the kind he used when something was not wrong yet, but also not right. Michael felt the familiar knot in his chest tighten. It was the same feeling that had kept him alive long ago, the one that told him to listen to what was not being said. He stood, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. The forest held its breath. Inside the house, the air was cooler, but heavy with the smell of rot and age. Michael grabbed his tools and walked to the basement door. Buddy followed close, his claws clicking softly on the wooden floor. The door creaked open, and the air from below hit them like a damp cloth, cool but smelling of stone, moss, and something older. The wooden stairs groaned under his weight as he descended slowly. The light from the small basement window drew thin lines across the floor. Dust floated like faint smoke in the air. The walls were made of rough stone, each block worn smooth by time. Michael knelt down to inspect them closer. Buddy's nose twitched. He moved to one corner, near the far wall, sniffing along the stones. His body lowered, ears pinned back, muscles tight. Then he stopped and scratched gently at a dark stone near the floor. It was different from the rest. Darker, smoother, and slightly loose at the edges. Michael felt his pulse shift. He knelt beside Buddy, running his fingers over the stone. It was cold, colder than the air around it. He pressed gently. It shifted a little, like something not meant to be part of the wall. He pulled a screwdriver from his belt and began working the edges carefully. After a few minutes, the stone came free with a dull scrape. Behind it was a small cavity in the wall. Inside, wrapped in a piece of rotting cloth, lay an object. Michael reached in slowly and pulled it out. The cloth crumbled at his touch, revealing a brass compass. Its surface was tarnished, its glass cracked, but the engraving on its back was still clear. A set of coordinates, etched deeply and neatly, circled the metal. The sight of it sent a quiet shiver through him. A compass was nothing strange, but hidden inside a wall was something else. He turned it over in his hands. The weight was heavy, solid, military issue, but older than anything he had ever used. Buddy sniffed the compass and sat down, ears still forward, as if waiting for whatever would come next. Michael pocketed the compass carefully. His heart was steady, but his mind was not. He could hear echoes of another life, another time. He remembered how small objects in the field often held stories no one wanted to read. This house had just whispered its first one. The rest of the afternoon was thick and slow. He moved through the rooms with a different awareness now. The house no longer felt like an empty shell. It felt like something with roots buried deep in the earth. The ticking of the old wall clock echoed against the silence like a steady heartbeat. That night, Michael lay on a cot he had set up in the living room. The windows were open, letting the warm night air drift through the house. The forest was alive outside, full of soft movements and distant sounds. He stared at the ceiling where the wooden beams disappeared into the shadows. His fingers brushed against the brass compass in his pocket. Sleep came, but not gently. It never did. The sound of helicopters rose in the distance of his mind, Then the sharp crack of gunfire. The heat of desert sand burned against his boots. Shouting, the ground shook. Then, as always, came the silence after. The silence that did not end. He jolted awake, sweat on his face, heart pounding against his ribs. The room was quiet. The forest outside hummed softly. Buddy was already at his side, pressed close, his head resting on Michael's arm. The dog's breath was warm against his skin, a slow, steady rhythm that cut through the noise in his chest. Michael rested his hand on the dog's back. Slowly, his pulse matched Buddy's breathing. In the quiet summer night, with the air still and heavy, the house held its secrets close. But Michael no longer felt like a stranger passing through. The hidden compass had changed everything. He was no longer cleaning a forgotten house. He was standing on the edge of something buried, something waiting to be uncovered. The summer morning was bright and heavy with warmth. The sun climbed slowly over the green ridges of Vermont, painting the leaves in sharp gold. The air held the dry scent of dust and warm pine sap. Willow Creek House stood quiet under that clear sky, its roof half hidden by branches. Somewhere far away, a woodpecker tapped against a trunk in the forest, the sound echoing faintly in the still air. Michael Carter leaned against the old truck, finishing the last sip of lukewarm coffee from a metal cup. His brown jacket was already sticking lightly to his back from the rising heat. Buddy sat nearby in the gravel, his tongue hanging slightly as he watched the forest edge. Morning sunlight touched the dog's tan and black fur, turning it almost bronze. Buddy's ears twitched at every rustle, his body relaxed but aware, as if ready to move the moment Michael did. Michael's fingers brushed against the brass compass in his pocket. The weight of it had not left his thoughts since the moment he pulled it from the basement wall. He turned it in his hand once more, watching the faint engraving of coordinates catch the light. The unease he had felt yesterday was still there, a quiet pressure at the base of his chest. He did not believe in coincidences, not after the places he had been. Objects were left behind for reasons. He drove down the narrow dirt road into the small town. It was a quiet place, with a few brick buildings, a post office, a diner with faded red chairs, and an old library that sat behind a row of maple trees. The library's white paint peeled in thin layers like old paper, and its wooden steps creaked when he climbed them. Inside, it smelled of dust, ink, and something almost sweet, like dried flowers. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead, moving the heavy summer air just enough to make it bearable. Behind the wooden counter sat Mrs. Ellen Markham. She was in her late 60s, tall but slightly stooped with thin shoulders, and her gray hair was pulled into a loose bun at the back of her head. She wore round wire glasses that made her soft brown eyes look a little larger than they were. Her dress was plain and neat, a faded green that matched the old armchairs scattered through the reading room. Ellen was known in town for remembering everything. She had a quiet way about her, kind but careful, like someone who had seen enough of life to know when to listen instead of speak. She looked up from her paperwork as Michael approached. Her expression was calm but curious. Newcomers were rare, especially men who carried the weight of war on their shoulders. Michael's presence, with his lean build, sun-worn face, and hazel hair streaked with silver, stood out against the sleepy rhythm of the town. Buddy walked at his side, tail low but wagging slightly, and Ellen's eyes softened at the sight of the dog. Michael explained that he was looking for records connected to Willow Creek House. Ellen's brow furrowed slightly as she tapped her pen on the desk, her mind digging through old memories. She guided him to the back room where the archives were kept, a cool space lined with metal filing cabinets and rows of bound newspapers. Dust motes swirled in the faint shafts of light filtering through the high windows. She moved with slow, practiced steps, pulling out folders that looked like they had not been touched in decades. Her voice was calm as she told him that the house had once belonged to an academic family, the Millers, who were known for keeping to themselves. Then her tone lowered a little. During the war, the government had used several private properties in Vermont for storage. Paintings, sculptures, crates of things too valuable to risk losing overseas. Willow Creek House had been one of those places. Michael listened in silence, his fingers tightening on the edge of the old folder she handed him. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings with headlines faded by time. He scanned them slowly. Words like storage site and federal property and cultural protection appeared again and again. There were photographs, too. Black and white images of soldiers standing near trucks parked under the same trees he had walked through days ago. The room felt smaller as he read. The compass in his pocket was no longer just a strange object hidden in a wall. It was a fragment of something deliberate, something buried. After thanking Ellen, Michael returned to the house with Buddy in the truck's passenger seat, his head out the window as the warm wind whipped past. The sun was high now, and the heat pressed down on the forest like a hand. When they reached Willow Creek House, the roof gleamed faintly through the trees. Dry leaves from seasons past still clung to the shingles. A faint metallic shape caught Michael's eye at the roof's edge. He climbed the narrow attic ladder, each step groaning as if complaining about its long sleep. The attic smelled of dust, dry wood, and the faint sweetness of sap. Thin streams of light cut through the cracks in the roof, painting lines across the floor. Buddy stood at the bottom, ears pricked, watching him. Michael pushed open the roof hatch and climbed out carefully. The shingles were warm against his palms, and the afternoon sun burned against his neck. He moved slowly, the old wood beneath him flexing slightly. At the far end, half hidden beneath a pile of dry leaves, sat a small copper vent, the kind used to release air from the house's hidden spaces. It was old, green with patina, but the markings on its rim made his pulse quicken. They matched the engravings on the compass. He brushed away the leaves and dirt, revealing the engraved lines fully. The compass fit perfectly against the circular pattern on the vent. His hands moved automatically, aligning the needle to the coordinates engraved on the metal. When the final point clicked into place, a faint sound echoed from below. A deep, heavy shift of metal against wood. The kind of sound a locked mechanism makes when it wakes up after a long time. Michael froze for a heartbeat, the sun beating against his back, sweat gathering on his forehead. His mind went sharp, scanning the sounds around him. Only the forest, still and heavy, answered. He climbed down, the old wood creaking louder than before. Buddy was pacing near the basement door now, tail straight, ears forward. He had heard it too. Inside the house, the air felt different. A vibration, faint but real, hung in the floorboards. Michael moved toward the basement, each step slow, measured. The hatch door opened with a tired sigh. A line of dust had fallen from the ceiling, as if something had shifted underneath. He stepped onto the wooden stairs, but before his second foot landed, the board beneath him gave a long crack. His body lurched forward, the edge of panic flashing through his chest. Then Buddy's jaws caught the edge of his jacket and pulled back with surprising strength. Michael steadied himself against the wall, breath sharp in his throat. Buddy stood firm, eyes locked on him, tail braced like a soldier holding position. Michael exhaled slowly, lowering himself to one knee. The floor at the bottom of the stairs had changed. A square section near the far wall had shifted open just enough to reveal the dull gray surface of steel beneath the dirt. A hidden door, silent and waiting. He reached out and brushed away the dust and splinters. The metal was cool under his fingers, untouched for decades. Buddy sat beside him, chest rising and falling with quiet breaths. The sun burned high outside, but down here the air was cool and still. Michael stared at the door, and something in him settled. This was no longer a question of an old house or a rusty compass. This was the beginning of something larger. He felt the weight of old decisions pressing through the walls, like the breath of the house itself. The summer air hung thick and unmoving over Willow Creek House. The sun had burned hot all afternoon, leaving behind a heavy warmth that wrapped around the forest like a still pond. Cicadas droned in long, steady notes, and somewhere beyond the trees, the river glimmered faintly under the late light. The house itself stood quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that hummed under the skin, waiting for something to disturb it. Michael Carter stood on the porch, sleeves rolled up, a fine layer of dust clinging to his jeans and brown jacket. The sun had already dipped low behind the trees, and the gold of late afternoon turned the overgrown path into a soft amber corridor. Buddy sat near the steps, ears relaxed but always listening, his tan and black coat catching the last of the light. Michael brushed his hands together, the smell of sun-warmed wood in the air, and reached for the compass in his pocket again. Its weight had become something constant, a reminder that this house was no longer just a house. The crunch of tires on the gravel road made both Michael and Buddy turn. It was a different sound from the lazy rhythm of wind in the leaves. A vehicle slowed near the gate, its engine smooth, quiet, expensive. Moments later, the sound of polished shoes on the gravel broke the afternoon stillness. A man appeared on the path, his figure sharp against the fading light. He wore a pale linen suit that fit him perfectly, the kind of tailored fabric that had never met a hard day's work. His hair was dark with silver at the temples, brushed back smoothly. He was tall, lean, with a posture that carried the kind of confidence born not of kindness, but of ownership. His face was angular, handsome in the way that photographs and magazines could be, but there was a precision to his smile that gave it no warmth. His eyes were a shade of gray that did not reflect light. Victor Hale was a man used to making people bend before he ever had to raise his voice. People in town had spoken of him in fragments. A businessman with deep pockets, a collector of rare things, a man whose generosity and threats often wore the same suit. Victor stopped a few feet away from the porch and gave Michael a practiced, easy smile. Michael said nothing at first, studying the man the way a soldier studies an unknown face in a checkpoint line. He had learned long ago to listen to the edges of things rather than the surface. Buddy stood at Michael's side, his body stiff, his tail low but straight, his ears pricked forward. He did not bark. Buddy rarely barked, but the quiet tension rolling off the dog was louder than any sound. Victor spoke in a smooth voice that carried too easily through the warm air. He said he had heard that Michael was the new owner of Willow Creek House. He said he was willing to make a very generous offer to take it off his hands. His words moved like silk, slow and even, as if the conversation had already been decided. Michael leaned against the porch railing, arms folded loosely. His face showed nothing. Inside, however, the steady hum of instinct tightened. A man like Victor did not drive into the woods in an expensive car on a hot summer afternoon just to make casual offers. His interest was too fast, too precise. The house was not listed for sale, and Victor Hale knew exactly where to find him. When Michael asked why he wanted the house, Victor's smile widened just enough to look polite, but his eyes did not change. He said something vague about history and heritage, about preserving valuable land. He mentioned a figure, a price far higher than any property in this area should be worth. The number hung between them like a hook. Michael's reply was quiet and firm. He said he was not interested. Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, but the smile never left his mouth. He gave a soft nod, the gesture of a man who was used to waiting for things he believed already belonged to him. He said he would be back in town for a while, and that Michael should think about it. Then he turned and walked away, his polished shoes leaving soft marks in the warm dust. His car disappeared down the road with the same smooth hum it had arrived with. Michael stayed on the porch long after the sound had faded. His jaw was tight, his hands resting on the railing. Buddy sat close, pressing his body against Michael's leg, sensing the shift in his heartbeat. The evening deepened around them, and the forest changed its voice. The cicadas quieted, replaced by the softer lower chorus of night insects. As darkness fell, Michael moved through the house in silence, checking the doors, the windows, and the lines of thin wire he had strung earlier that week along the perimeter of the yard. It was a simple system, invisible to anyone who did not know where to look. A tug on any of the lines would send the small metal clips near the porch into a faint ring. Old habits did not fade easily. Inside, he sat by the window, with Buddy lying beside him, the dog's body warm and steady against his boots. His fingers traced the compass idly, but his mind was elsewhere. Years of training had taught him that the danger that announces itself with a smile is often the one that strikes hardest. Near midnight, the summer air had cooled just slightly, leaving a thin veil of mist around the house. The moon was a pale disk above the trees. The sound came first as a soft metallic tremor. The alarm wire. Buddy was on his feet before Michael had fully registered it. The dog's ears were sharp, body low and ready, eyes focused on the back of the house. Michael rose without sound, moving through the hall like a shadow. The wooden floor creaked softly under his boots. Buddy stayed tight to his side. At the back of the house, the screen door opened to the yard, where the mist hugged the grass like thin smoke. The night insects filled the silence, but under it was something else. The slow rhythm of footsteps trying to be quiet. He crouched near the edge of the porch, watching. A shape moved near the tree line, too smooth to be an animal. Someone was out there. Michael reached for his phone, the motion practiced and silent. His thumb hovered over a single contact he had not used in months. Tom Reyes. Tom had served with him years ago. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with thick black hair just starting to gray at the edges and a jaw marked by a faint scar that told a story he never repeated. He worked now as a federal agent investigating trafficking networks, the kind that dealt not in money alone, but in the bones and treasures of history. Tom was sharp, methodical, and carried a humor so dry it sometimes cracked like old wood. He trusted very few people, but Michael was one of them. Years in the same fire do that. Michael called him, his voice low and steady, as he explained that someone was watching the house. Tom did not ask unnecessary questions. He only said he would start the process and be ready. Michael ended the call quietly and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Outside, the footsteps faded into the woods. Whoever had been there was gone for now. But the night no longer felt like just summer air and forest. It felt like the breath before a storm. Buddy pressed against Michael's leg, solid as stone. The house stood silent, the mist rising around its base like smoke. Michael understood now that Victor Hale's visit had not been a friendly offer. It had been the beginning of something that would not be solved with words. The air over Willow Creek was thick with heat by late afternoon. The forest held its breath as if waiting for something beneath the summer light. The house stood at the edge of the trees, its walls breathing faint creaks. The dirt road shimmered with trapped warmth, and cicadas hummed a low, endless note. There was no wind, no movement, just the still weight of a summer day on the verge of cracking open. Michael Carter knelt near the steel hatch in the basement floor, the brass compass open in his palm. The coordinates etched along its back had led him here, to the hidden lock beneath the house. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. Buddy stood close behind him, tail straight, ears pricked, the dog's chest rising in steady rhythm. His presence was a quiet anchor in the warm air. The steel mechanism embedded in the floor was old, its surface worn but still solid. A sequence of small numbers and notches circled the lock. Michael turned the compass slowly until its engraving aligned perfectly with the markings on the door. A faint metallic click echoed through the basement like a heartbeat. The heavy door shifted, releasing a stale breath of cold air from below. Michael's pulse tightened. He gripped the handle and pulled. Rust groaned. Hinges protested, and the steel hatch lifted with a dull weight. A square opening yawned beneath him, dark and cold against the summer heat. A set of iron steps disappeared into the shadow. A draft rose up, smelling of old stone and oil, thick with time. He took out a flashlight and aimed the beam downward. Dust swirled in the light like faint smoke. Buddy leaned forward, nose twitching, his hackles rising slightly. The dog did not bark, but the small sound in his throat told Michael everything. Something waited below. He descended slowly, one boot at a time, the steps ringing faintly. The air cooled with each level, damp and close. The beam of the flashlight caught rows of wooden crates stacked against the walls, their corners marked with faded stamps and military seals. A network of pipes ran overhead, silent. At the center of the chamber, a long table stood covered in cloth sheets. He brushed one aside, revealing wooden frames, paintings, oil on canvas, landscapes, portraits, still lifes. Their colors were muted by age, but still clung to a kind of fragile beauty. Along one wall were steel shelves, lined with small black cases and leather folders. He opened one and found lists, receipts, shipment records. Another held envelopes with government seals long since yellowed. He unfolded a single page. Names, dates, inventory numbers, shipment destinations, all tied to cultural property moved during the war. His chest tightened as he read further. A second envelope, tucked deeper in the shelf, held a handwritten letter brittle with age. It was addressed to a federal officer and carried a single accusation written in firm, controlled strokes. The Hale family had acquired art through forged documents and quiet deals. Michael's hands stilled on the page. He did not trust easily, but this was evidence, the kind that people killed to keep buried. Buddy brushed against his leg, the dog's warm body grounding him again. The house had been whispering all this time. Now it was finally speaking. The sound from upstairs snapped his attention back. A soft scrape, followed by the dull thud of something heavy against the back door. Buddy froze, ears locked on the ceiling. Michael slid the letter into his jacket pocket, turned off the flashlight, and climbed the steps soundlessly, years of training guiding his movements. He reached the basement door, just as another sound echoed through the house. A hinge strained. Wood cracked faintly. Outside, headlights cut through the trees. A car had pulled up near the clearing. The pattern of the beams was low, controlled, familiar. It was Tom Reyes. Tom stepped out of the vehicle like a man who had walked through danger enough times to make caution look natural. He was tall and lean, with black hair touched by gray at the edges, a jaw marked by the faint scar he had carried for half his life. His dark jacket moved with him, like part of his frame. Behind him, two black SUVs rolled in silently, federal agents moving into position like shadows through the trees. Tom's voice was low when he spoke to Michael, calm but edged with steel. The kind of voice men used when they were not surprised, but ready. Michael nodded once, and Tom understood everything he needed to. Their friendship had been forged in places where words were often a liability. Tom gave a hand signal to the team, fanning out toward the back of the house. The first intruder stepped into the yard just as the agents closed in. A tall man in black, movements careful, face hidden beneath a cap. Then another. Then a third. The back door gave a sharp metallic snap as the lock was forced. Buddy let out a deep sound. Not a bark, but a warning. His body low and tight like a drawn bow. Michael moved through the hallway like a shadow, stopping behind the edge of the wall near the kitchen. The men entered quietly, too quietly for anyone who belonged there. Their steps carried a precision that told him they were professionals. The air felt heavier, the silence thinner. In the distance, the faint crunch of boots in the brush signaled the agents closing the trap. The lead man stepped forward, and then the forest behind the house erupted with light. Tom's voice rang sharp and steady, cutting through the humid night. Federal commands snapped into the air. The men turned too late. Agents surrounded them with silent precision. A single name broke through the radio chatter. Victor Hale. Michael walked out from the shadows with Buddy at his side. Victor stood near the tree line, his pale suit glowing faintly in the harsh lights. His gray eyes were flat, stripped of the smooth charm he had carried days ago. He had misjudged this house. He had misjudged the man standing in it. Buddy positioned himself in front of Michael, his body stiff, ears forward, tail locked. A soldier's stance in a dog's frame. Tom approached Victor with calm steps, the kind that carry authority without shouting. His voice was low as he gave the order. Handcuffs clicked in the warm air. The forest exhaled again. Michael let his breath out slowly. The night settled around him, thick but clean. The old house seemed quieter, the weight of its hidden history no longer buried alone. He ran his hand over Buddy's head, the fur warm under his palm. The dog's steady breathing matched his own. He did not feel victory exactly, It was something quieter, a hard truth pulled into the light at last. The morning light of late summer stretched softly over the trees. A thin mist hovered at the edge of the forest before fading into the warm air. The sun climbed steadily, filling Willow Creek with a golden glow that soaked into the wood and stone of the old house. The cicadas began their steady song, and a light breeze moved gently through the high branches. For the first time in a long time, the house did not feel like it was holding its breath. It felt alive. Michael Carter stood on the front porch, one hand resting on the railing that had been newly sanded and painted. His brown jacket, the same one that had followed him through deserts and forests, hung open. His jeans were faded but clean. The morning sun caught in his hazel hair, streaking the silver at his temples. His shoulders were relaxed in a way they had not been for years. Buddy lay stretched out on the wooden boards at his feet, the black and tan of his fur bright against the sunlight. The dog's ears flicked lazily at the sound of birds, but his eyes were soft. For once, there was no tension in his stance, no sharp alertness ready to snap, only ease. A few weeks had passed since the night the steel door opened and Victor Hale's men were taken away. The federal investigation had unfolded quickly after that. Tom Reyes had been there every step of the way, moving with the same steady patience that had kept him alive for decades. Tom was a man who carried his authority quietly, letting results speak louder than his words. The evidence from the hidden basement had opened a case that tied into smuggling networks across several states. Victor Hale now sat in a holding cell waiting for trial. His smile was gone, replaced by silence. Michael had spent most of those days in quiet cooperation with the federal team. It was a strange feeling, watching people in uniforms moving through the same house that once sat in silence around him. They cataloged the art, lifted the crates, and sealed the letters and records that had been buried for decades. Some of the paintings were returned to their original owners, families who had waited generations without knowing where their pieces had gone. Others were given to museums. Every item carried a story, each one peeling back a layer of history that had been hidden beneath the weight of moss and wood. Sarah Whitmore had returned as well, the lawyer's sharp eyes calm but satisfied. She stood out against the soft edges of the house with her neat dark suit and chestnut hair streaked with gray. Sarah had spent much of her career sorting through tangled inheritance cases, but this one was different. She moved through the porch with a rare quiet smile, something warm breaking through her usual practiced tone. She told Michael the property would remain under his care, as part of an agreement with the federal authorities. He could do what he wanted with it. Tom had come by that afternoon too, leaning against his black SUV, with a tired grin that barely reached his eyes, but was real nonetheless. His black hair, threaded with silver, looked rougher in the daylight. His jaw carried its familiar scar. He had told Michael, in his usual dry tone, that not many places in this country could hold secrets that deep anymore. Then he clapped Michael on the shoulder, with a hand heavy from years of trust. Tom Reyes was not a man who offered long speeches. He spoke through action and rare, quiet gestures. The town had changed too. People who had once laughed at the house now slowed their steps when they passed it. Word had spread of what had been found beneath its floors. Some spoke in hushed tones, others with reverence, but all of them looked at Willow Creek differently now. The land no longer belonged to whispers. Michael used part of the reward money to restore the house, not to erase its age, but to make it breathe again. The roof was rebuilt with red-brown tiles that caught the sun. The porch railings were repaired, and fresh wooden beams framed the windows. Ivy climbed the sides again, but now it was trimmed and alive instead of wild and choking. Inside, the walls were painted in soft, warm tones, the kind that carried light even when the sun dipped behind the trees. He built a center for veterans and their support dogs, a place for men and women like him to rest for a while, to let the noise of the world settle into something quiet. He knew what silence could do to a person, both the good and the dangerous. Now he wanted that silence to be healing. On the day of the dedication, the townspeople gathered under the warm sky. Children ran along the gravel path. Old wooden benches lined the porch. Buddy sat proudly at Michael's side as the mayor, a short man with silver hair and a kind round face, stood in front of the crowd to speak. His name was Harold Green. His skin was tanned from years working outside, and his voice carried an easy authority. He had been the town's mayor for nearly 15 years, known for his patience and for solving problems with calm rather than volume. The mayor spoke of history and justice. He spoke of what had been hidden and what had been returned. Then he turned to Buddy. The German shepherd sat upright, his ears pricked but calm, his amber eyes clear under the summer sun. The mayor lowered a small ribbon with a polished bronze medallion onto Buddy's collar. It was engraved with the town's emblem. The people clapped softly, then louder, and for a brief moment the world tilted into something warm. Michael knelt down, resting a hand on Buddy's shoulder. The dog leaned into the touch. He remembered nights when that same weight had pulled him out of the dark, when panic had been a beast pressing against his lungs. Buddy had been there through it all, without asking for explanations. Now the town had seen it too. As the crowd thinned and the sun lowered, turning the light gold and soft, Michael sat on the porch steps with Buddy beside him. The ivy leaves rustled in the warm breeze. The house behind him no longer carried the weight of hidden walls. It carried the voices of people, the sound of new steps, the hum of something beginning. His hazel hair moved lightly in the breeze, and his hands rested on his knees. Buddy lay with his head on Michael's boot, eyes half closed. For the first time in years, Michael felt no pressure at the edge of his chest, no weight pressing from the past. The noise in his mind had softened into the hum of cicadas and the rustle of summer leaves. The air smelled of pine and warm earth. Above the trees, the sky burned orange and pink. It was not a dramatic ending. It was quieter, cleaner, and more real. The kind of ending that does not close a door, but lets light fall through it. Michael leaned back on his hands, his jacket soft against his shoulders. Buddy's breathing matched the rhythm of the evening. For a man who had carried war in his bones, this was something close to peace. It was not the end of the story, but it was enough. The summer sky deepened into the soft gold of early evening, and the cicada's song rose like a quiet chorus across the valley. The house at Willow Creek no longer stood as a forgotten shell. It had become something greater, a place where history found light again, and broken spirits found rest. In its walls, courage met kindness. Through its windows, hope breathed. Michael Carter, a man who had once walked through war carrying silence like a stone, now watched as that same silence became a refuge for others. Buddy, the loyal dog, who had stood beside him through darkness, now lay in the sunlight, wearing a medal that carried the weight of gratitude from an entire town. The forest around them whispered not of secrets anymore, but of a new beginning built on trust and love. The story of Willow Creek is more than a tale of hidden treasure and justice. It is a reminder that light can return to even the quietest corners of life, that one house can hold not just memories of pain, but also the seeds of healing for a community. That one act of courage can ripple outward, touching hearts that have long forgotten how to believe. Perhaps it was not luck that brought Michael here. Perhaps it was grace. God works in quiet ways, through simple moments, through the loyal heartbeat of a dog, through the strength of a man who refuses to turn away. In this world, where shadows often speak louder than light, hope still has a voice. And sometimes, that voice begins in places we least expect. May this story be a small reminder that miracles still bloom in everyday soil. They do not arrive in thunder or fire, but in the steady rhythm of people choosing to love, to rebuild, to stand together. May the blessings of the Lord rest on your home, your heart, and your journey ahead. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and join this growing circle of kindness. And tonight, when the world grows quiet, say a prayer for those still searching for their own Willow Creek. That light may find them too. God bless you.